Rain hissed softly against the pavement as Jason stumbled out of the narrow alley onto the dimly lit street. Neon lights from a bar sign flickered behind him, flashing across the puddles like shards of color. He wasn't drunk, just angry, restless, and trying not to think about what his ex had said. The city felt heavy, like it was breathing around him. He walked fast, hands buried in his pockets, hoodie pulled up against the drizzle. He didn't even notice the patrol car glide to a stop beside him until the blue-white beam of a flashlight sliced through the rain. "Hey, you there! Hold up a sec!" Jason froze. A tall officer stepped out, rain glinting off his uniform. The man's voice carried authority, but something in his tone wasn't sharp. It was curious, cautious. "You look a little suspicious walking around this area at this hour," the officer said, approaching. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" Jason lifted his gaze, meeting the officer's steady eyes. "Just walking." Needed air. For a moment, they just stood there, the night quiet, except for rain splattering against the hood of the cruiser. The officer's breath misted in the cold air as his flashlight swept over Jason, his face, hands, pockets. Then it hesitated, almost lingering. "Step over here," the officer ordered gently, motioning him toward the corner of the building. Jason obeyed, pulse quickening for reasons he couldn't name. As the officer drew closer, Jason caught a faint scent of cologne under the wet fabric of his jacket. The man's jaw was sharp, his voice lower now. "You nervous?" "Wouldn't you be?" Jason replied. Their eyes locked again, longer this time, too long for it to mean nothing. Jason saw something flicker in the man's expression, as if he were caught between duty and something he didn't want to admit. "Name's Eric," the man said finally, quieter. "Officer Collins." Jason swallowed. Jason. The sound of their names hung in the air like a secret neither of them wanted to end. The rain eased, but something inside both of them had just begun. Officer Collins stepped closer, his flashlight now resting against his thigh. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air still clung to Jason's skin, damp and electric. Eric's eyes flicked over him again, lingering on the way Jason's hoodie clung to his shoulders, the way his breath came just a little too fast. "Turn around," Eric said, voice low but firm. "Hands against the wall." Jason obeyed, pressing his palms flat against the cold brick. The city hummed behind them, distant sirens, the occasional car, the quiet pulse of the night. He could feel Eric's presence behind him, close enough that the warmth of his body cut through the chill. "Relax," Eric murmured, his hands moving with practiced precision. "This is just procedure." But Jason didn't relax. Every touch sent a jolt through him. Eric's fingers brushed his sides, slid down his arms, checked his pockets. Each movement was careful, deliberate, but Jason could feel something else beneath the professionalism, a hesitation, a pause, as if Eric was searching for more than contraband. "You're tense," Eric said, his voice softer now. "You don't have to be afraid." Jason swallowed. "I'm not afraid. Just not used to this." Eric's hands stilled for a moment. "You're not in trouble. Not unless you want to be." Jason turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of Eric's profile. The officer's jaw was tight, but his eyes held something unreadable. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper. Jason felt his pulse quicken again. Eric stepped back, giving Jason space. "All clear," he said, but his gaze didn't leave Jason's face. "You can turn around." Jason turned, meeting Eric's eyes. The officer's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze, something that made Jason's stomach twist. "You're not like most people I stop," Eric said, almost to himself. "You're different." Jason raised an eyebrow. Different how? Eric hesitated, then shook his head. Never mind. Just be careful out here, Jason. It's not safe. Jason nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Eric wasn't just talking about the city. There was something else in his voice, something that made Jason wonder if this was about more than just a routine stop. Eric stepped back, his flashlight sweeping the street. You should head home. It's late. Jason hesitated, then nodded. Thanks. As he turned to leave, Eric's voice stopped him. Wait. Jason turned back. Eric was watching him, his expression unreadable. If you need a ride, I can give you one. Jason's heart skipped a beat. You'd do that? Eric nodded. It's not far, right? Jason smiled, a slow, uncertain smile. Not far at all. Jason slid into the passenger seat, the warmth of the patrol car wrapping around him like a quiet sigh after the cold outside. The faint hum of the engine filled the silence as Eric climbed in behind the wheel, his gloved hands steady on the steering wheel. The soft red and blue lights from the dashboard flickered across their faces, painting the space between them in subtle, shifting color. For a moment, neither spoke. Jason could feel his pulse in his throat, in his fingertips. What had just happened outside still burned under his skin. Eric's voice, his admission. The air felt fragile, ready to break under the weight of unspoken thoughts. So, Jason finally said, eyes fixed on the windshield. You really weren't just stopping me for walking alone, huh? Eric gave a small, breathy laugh, glancing at him. Guess not. That's bad procedure, though. Maybe don't tell my supervisor. Jason smiled faintly. Your secret's safe. For now. They both chuckled, but there was tension threaded through the humor, something more complicated than either wanted to admit. Rain began to tap again against the windows, a rhythmic pulse that matched the quiet between them. Eric's tone softened. You look lost back there. I couldn't just drive past. I don't know what it was. Maybe the look in your eyes. It got me. Jason turned to him. You always say things like that to guys you stop? Eric's jaw flexed. No, you're the first. The sincerity hit Jason harder than he expected. Outside, the city lights blurred past, streaking through the wet glass like trembling veins of gold. He studied Eric's face, the sharp outline, the faint weariness in his eyes, the flicker of something vulnerable. You don't seem like someone who does things halfway, Jason said quietly. Neither do you, Eric replied. The words hung between them, heavier than before. Jason's pulse jumped. He looked away, exhaling slowly as they pulled into his street. Quiet, lined with dim apartment windows. The car stopped in front of his building, and for a moment, neither reached for the door handle. Thanks for the ride, Jason said, voice low. Eric nodded, watching him. You're welcome. Jason paused, hand hovering near the handle. You want to come up for coffee? He wasn't sure why he said it, but somehow it felt inevitable. Eric hesitated, his lips parting as if to answer, then exhaled and cut the engine. Yeah, he said finally. I'd like that. Jason's apartment smelled faintly of rain and instant coffee. The light from a single lamp spilled across the small living room, soft and golden, brushing over the thrift store couch, the books stacked against the wall, the half-open curtains. Eric stood in the doorway, his posture tense, unsure if he belonged there. You can sit, Jason said, shrugging off his hoodie. His voice wavered slightly, betraying nerves he didn't want to show. Coffee's in the kitchen, unless you prefer tea? Coffee's fine, Eric replied, his gaze following Jason as he moved toward the counter. He still hadn't taken off his jacket. His hand flexed once at his side, as though he wasn't sure what to do with it. The sound of the kettle filled the silence. Steam hissed quietly. Jason turned, leaning casually against the counter, but his eyes were searching. "You don't usually follow people home, do you, Officer Collins?" Eric smiled faintly, lowering his head. "No, I don't usually get caught up like this." "Caught up?" Jason asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yeah." Eric's voice was quiet now. "In someone." Jason froze, the steam curling between them like a living thing. The rain had finally stopped outside, and somehow the world had gone still, leaving only this charged quiet. He moved toward Eric slowly, uncertain, curious. "I don't know what this is," Jason admitted, "but it doesn't feel wrong." Eric looked at him, eyes dark and unreadable. "It should, though." "Then why are you still here?" The question landed like a spark in dry air. Eric's jaw tightened. His fingers brushed along the seam of his jacket before unbuttoning it, carefully, as if every movement had weight. "Because," he said at last, "I can't stop thinking about what might happen if I leave." Jason stared at him for a long moment, before breaking into a small, nervous laugh. "You're terrible at pretending to be just a cop." "Yeah," Eric admitted, a real smile flickering for the first time. "Guess I'm not so good at keeping lines straight." Jason took a step closer, heart pounding. "Lines are blurry anyway." The kettle clicked off, forgotten. The silence stretched thin again, taut with promise and hesitation. Eric's voice lowered. "If I cross this line, Jason, there's no going back." Jason's breath trembled. "Then maybe we stop pretending there ever was one." Jason woke to the quiet hum of the city outside, the faint glow of dawn seeping through the curtains. For a moment, he lay still, his mind hazy, unsure where the night had ended and where morning began. The sound of slow, even breathing reached him. Eric, asleep on the couch, uniform jacket draped over the armrest. Jason had offered the bed, but Eric had refused with a half smile, saying he didn't want to push further than they already had. It was both gentle and frustrating. Jason sat up, rubbing at his eyes. The memory of their closeness, Eric's voice, his gaze, the electricity of the moment before they'd pulled apart, still burned in him. They hadn't crossed that final line, though it had been so close. Something about that restraint made it even heavier, more real. In the small kitchen, Jason poured coffee, the same one Eric never got to drink last night. The smell filled the apartment, grounding him. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about how fast everything had changed. A midnight encounter turned into something that didn't feel accidental at all. Eric stirred, blinking into wakefulness, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked younger this way, almost vulnerable. "You're up early," he murmured, voice rough. "Couldn't sleep," Jason said softly, kept replaying everything in my head. Eric sat up, stretching. "Yeah, me too." They shared a quiet look across the room. Nothing needed to be said, yet everything was there. The tension, the curiosity, the fear that real life would crash in once daylight did. "I shouldn't have stayed," Eric admitted, his voice gentle. "It's complicated, you know." Jason nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I know. But I'm not sorry." Eric smiled at that, faint and tired. He picked up his jacket, slipping it back on, his badge catching the pale light. "Neither am I." He moved toward the door, pausing for a long heartbeat, as if deciding whether to say goodbye or something more. "Jason." His voice softened again. "Last night, it wasn't just in your head." Jason felt something shift inside him, a pulse of warmth he couldn't name. The door closed quietly behind Eric, leaving the air heavy with what could have been. Jason sank onto the couch, eyes fixed on the morning sky through the window. His pulse was still uneven, but his chest felt full. The night wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. And somewhere out there, he knew Eric was feeling the same.